My boss blamed me for a mistake I never made, destroying my reputation in front of everyone, but when the truth finally came out, everyone learned who had really orchestrated the scheme. That morning I arrived at the office, placed my coffee on the left corner of my desk, opened my laptop and as usual began reading the emails from the previous evening, when I noticed that the entire floor was quieter than normal. People were staring at their screens, but their attention was somewhere else. A few eyes lifted toward me, then quickly dropped, as though a piece of news had already traveled through the office before it had reached me. I had worked for that company for 11 years, first as an ordinary project coordinator, then as an operations manager, and during those 11 years I had never raised my voice, never taken credit for someone else's work, and never made excuses to hide a mistake. Perhaps that was why, when my boss, Richard, called me into the conference room, I did not imagine that he was about to blame me for the failure of a project whose complete files I had never even been allowed to access. Besides Richard, the finance director, the HR manager, a representative from the legal department, and 2 senior executives were seated in the room. In the center of the table lay the quarterly expansion report, the project under which the company had planned to open distribution centers in 3 new states, and which had now resulted in losses of nearly $2 million because of inaccurate figures, fabricated vendor estimates, and unauthorized contracts. Richard looked at me and said that every operational approval had been issued under my name, that I had held final responsibility for vendor selection, and that my team had prepared the financial projections presented to the board. His voice was gentle, almost sympathetic, as though he were not destroying me, but simply helping me understand an unfortunate truth. I opened the report and saw my electronic signature on the first page. Then I studied the approval dates when I had either been in another city attending client meetings or officially on leave. One approval had even been submitted the day before Thanksgiving, while I was sitting at the airport waiting for a delayed flight to my sister's house, complaining about it in our family group chat. I said only one thing. I did not approve this. Richard took a long breath, then said the system showed otherwise and the company had to hold someone accountable. That single sentence told me everything I needed to know. The company did not want the truth, it wanted a name, and mine was convenient, because I had spent years quietly doing difficult work, correcting other people's mistakes, and assuming that consistent effort eventually became its own testimony. That afternoon I was placed on administrative leave, my access was disabled, and my office door was opened in the presence of HR. I was told to place my belongings in a small cardboard box, a framed photograph, 2 notebooks, an old drawing my daughter had made, and a coffee mug that said, "Calm is a superpower." People watched me leave. No one said anything and I offered no explanation. When I got home, I placed the box on the dining room table, removed my shoes and stood for a while in front of the kitchen window. Outside, a neighbor was clearing dry leaves from his lawn, and across the street, a mother was waiting for her children to step off the school bus. The world was moving at its normal pace. Only my professional life had been stopped by a few signatures. My husband, Daniel, came home that evening and said we needed to hire an attorney immediately, but I told him that first I needed to understand exactly what had happened, because a defense should not be built from anger, it should be built from order. Within days, the company announced my termination. The language was carefully chosen, but the meaning was clear: internal policy violations, financial negligence, breach of trust. The same trust one had spent 11 years building had been erased in a few lines. Some co-workers sent quiet messages. A few said they could not believe it, some said they would pray for me, and others, people who had once talked with me about Sunday trips to Costco, PTA meetings and office holiday dinners, disappeared as though our entire relationship had existed only through a company email address. I asked no one for help, but I saved every message. In my home office I had old records, documents I had kept not for protection, but because organization had always been my habit: meeting notes, calendar invitations, project revisions, voice memos, vendor comparison sheets, and emails Richard sometimes sent late at night from his personal account so they would not leave a complete trail inside the company system. I reviewed every date and slowly the design of what had happened began to reveal itself. Richard had created the original expansion plan. He had secretly arranged a consulting contract with a firm owned by his former college roommate. Vendor costs had been deliberately underestimated, projections had been altered to secure board approval, and when the losses began to surface, my login credentials had been used to create the approvals. I had suspicion, but suspicion was not enough. especially when the person involved was a senior vice president and I had already been declared guilty. I did not rush. I woke early, made coffee, drove my daughter to school, then spent hours organizing documents. After lunch, I spoke with my attorney. In the evenings, I ate dinner with my family, and at night, I continued building my timeline as though I were not asking for my life back, but correcting a complicated set of accounts. Daniel sometimes worried about our retirement plans and our 401k, but I told him money could be earned again. A lie attached to your name, if it is not removed in time, can become part of your family's inheritance. About 7 weeks later, a former IT analyst called me. He had also been quietly dismissed by the company. He told me Richard had ordered my access credentials to be reset, then used a remote login to issue the approvals. The system logs still contained the device ID from Richard's office computer. That was the proof I had been waiting for. I did not celebrate loudly. I did not threaten anyone, and I posted nothing on social media. I placed the documents, system logs, personal emails, vendor connections, and altered projections into one organized file. Then, through my attorney, sent everything to the company's board, its external auditors, the insurance investigators, and the appropriate regulatory office. I gave Richard no warning. 2 weeks later, the board opened an emergency investigation, and I was invited to a formal meeting in the same conference room where my reputation had been destroyed on paper. This time Richard was not there. The board chair explained that the investigation had confirmed my credentials were used without authorization, that the project figures had been deliberately altered, and that the decision to place the blame on me had been planned in advance. He apologized, then offered me reinstatement, back pay, and a financial settlement. I accepted the apology, but I refused the job. I did not want the chair back if I first had to prove I was not a thief in order to sit in it. Richard was fired. A civil case was opened against him, the consulting contract was cancelled, and the company withdrew my termination notice and issued a public correction. Still, the news did not bring the satisfaction people imagine, because justice rarely arrives like a celebration. Most of the time, it simply removes a weight from your chest. A few months later, I opened my own operations consulting firm. At first, I had only 3 clients, then 7, and eventually enough that I hired 2 additional employees. I still place my coffee on the left corner of my desk every morning, but now no one owns my name, my time, or my work. I did not learn that every boss is dishonest, or that every coworker disappears when life becomes difficult. I learned only that silence is not weakness, provided that while you are silent you are collecting evidence. My revenge was not Richard's downfall. My revenge was refusing to give him the authority to define my character. I allowed time to speak, and when time finally placed the truth in my hands, I delivered it quietly to the right doors. Today, I look out the window of my new office and there is no celebration in front of me, no applause, only the peace that comes from knowing I did not beg for my dignity to be returned. I placed it back where it belonged, supported by proof. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that the truth always finds its way to the surface, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, inspiring stories. Your support truly means a lot and helps us keep sharing meaningful content. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.